Thank you very much, and good afternoon. Well, I was asked to talk a little bit about my work today and some of the ways that I've used to engage people over the years to care about the ocean. 40 years ago, the summer of 1978, I became a certified scuba diver. I had fallen in love with the sea as a child and dreamed about exploring underwater. So I became a certified scuba diver at about age 15. About a year later, I discovered that photography was the perfect way for me to do that. I was very interested in visual storytelling, and the notion of using a camera to photograph the things that I was seeing and tell stories greatly appealed to me. 20 years ago, I got my very first assignment from National Geographic magazine, and that made all the difference. I could finally tell those stories in the very best way possible. This is my original certification card from 1978. I did become a scuba diver shortly after breaking up with the Beatles. But right from the very beginning, I understood that we lived on a water planet. And the more we knew about this watery world, the better off we would be. So I set out to tell those stories. My work has been about exploring this watery world photographically. It's really been a lifetime journey of discovery and of peeling back the layers of mystery that exist with wildlife and ecosystems in the sea. You know, I've come to sort of see my most important role as an artistic interpreter of all that I see and as a storyteller. I need to understand the science, but what I'm really trying to capture is the poetry that exists in nature and underwater. As we all know here at National Geographic, images are very powerful. Photography can be an incredibly powerful tool to motivate people to care. The right image can stay with somebody for their lifetime. So in the years that I've been doing this work, I continually search for those special moments underwater to make people want to know more. It could be a simple thing like a tiny yellow fish, this yellow goby, living inside a abandoned soda can in the bottom of Suruga Bay in Japan. Or it might be a 45-foot, 70-ton whale interacting with a diver in the subantarctic of New Zealand. This was a newly discovered population of southern right whales that we found that were extremely curious about me and my assistant. You know, doing this kind of work is essential, and for me, it's about always bringing people into these moments through photography. But as my career evolved, I realized that I needed to do more. You know, I was witnessing a lot of degradation occurring in our world's oceans, coral reefs dying, and fish not in the places where I used to see fish. So I began turning my cameras towards these issues to tell a more complete story of what was happening underwater. In 2005, I proposed a story on something called the global fisheries crisis, which was really looking at the problems of commercial industrialized overfishing. I'd read a scientific paper around that time that stated that 90% of the big fish in the ocean have vanished because we took them all. So I did this story for about 2 years. It was published in 2007 as a cover story. And with this story, I knew that I wanted to approach it differently. I didn't want it to be just a pretty underwater story. I wanted to approach it more like war photography. I wanted to show people what was happening to marine wildlife around the planet because in many respects, this is very different than other things that we eat. It's harvested in an unsustainable way and in unsustainable levels. I also wanted to show people some of the way that fish are caught because once again, this isn't really on our radar. This is one of the most common methods of fishing in the world. It's a bottom trawler. This one was being used in Mexico to catch shrimp. And it's essentially a net with buoys at the top and a lead-weighted line on the bottom and two big steel doors. And when the entire assembly is towed behind a fishing boat, it opens up. And as you can imagine, it's very effective at catching whatever the intended species might be, in this case, shrimp that bounce into that net. But as you can also envision, it's indiscriminate. It catches everything in its path. And because this was a bottom trawler, it's also effectively clear-cutting that beautiful benthic area on the bottom. This picture shows the fisherman's hands holding the shrimp that he caught after towing that net for 1 hour. And all those other animals that are dead on the deck of his boat are incidental kill, known as bycatch, that will be thrown back into the sea as trash. This is what I wanted readers to understand, that in many places in the world, this is the true cost of a shrimp dinner. A handful of shrimp and 12 pounds of other animals that have to die in the process. But as I worked on this story, it was very depressing. You know, my editor, Catherine Moran, and I, we sort of realized there wasn't a lot of good news, but we needed hope because if there's no hope, if there are no solutions, then what's the point? So in that same issue, I photographed another story about the ocean's resilience, the ability to heal itself, and the value of marine protected areas. I went to New Zealand because New Zealand was quite progressive in protecting their EEZ, their exclusive economic zone, and they had seen this resilience, this restoring of ocean ecosystems. This was a photo I made in the North Island, a place called Port Knights Island, on a very stormy day when the boat captain didn't want to go out, but I sort of pushed him because I had this picture of diversity and abundance in my head, largely because the day before I had tea with an old-time Kiwi diver, a guy named Wade Doak, and over tea, Wade mentioned to me that he thought that the marine life was better there today than it was when he began diving in the 1950s. As I left him and was preparing my equipment for the next day's dive, it sort of dawned on me that nobody's ever said that before. Everywhere I go, people say, you should have been here a decade ago. The corals were better, the fish were better, the sharks were better. But this was a place that was better today than it was in the 1950s, simply because they made it a no-take marine reserve in the 1980s. So the message is clear that nature is resilient and tolerant to a point, but we must see, and I think we need examples of this to help people understand those notions. And this brings me to some of my most recent work, a decade later, a cover story that I did last February for the magazine, February of 2017, about saving America's oceans. And I proposed this story using the premise of 2016, which was the centennial anniversary of the National Park Service in the United States, an idea that's been called America's best idea. And I wanted to use the next century to look forward to protecting America's oceans, because we really haven't done very much in that regard. So I set out to photograph places that many folks will never get to see, like Cortez Banks, a beautiful kelp forest environment ecosystem located 100 miles off of San Diego, California. Very hard to get to, but if you do get there, it's this magical Dr. Seuss-like landscape that you can swim over. And because it's a kelp forest, that kelp grows up to the surface and provides an oasis in the middle of the sea for all this life. But as you can imagine, a single trawl net could come through here and destroy it forever, and it would die with a whimper. Nobody would know. But that's what I wanted people to see, that we own this. This is part of us, and we need to protect these places. My last location for this story was Midway Atoll in the northwest Hawaiian Islands with President Obama. And we see my dear friend Sylvia Earle here presenting him with a fish print of an endemic fish that some researchers found here and named after him. It's Tostanades Obama. And I was very pleasantly surprised and thrilled to be invited to go snorkeling with the president. So for the next 3 hours that afternoon, I was able to make the very first pictures of a US president underwater, snorkeling over this place where he had just protected the world's largest marine protected area a couple of days before. And that evening, back at the mess hall, I was having dinner with Sylvia, and she said, "Brian, I'm green with envy that you got to do that. I'm blue with envy," I think is what she said. And but then she very nicely said, "You know, I think that it was better that a photographer went, because having these images could have a positive ripple effect around the world and really make a difference to inspire people to do the right thing, to do what Obama did." So I wanted to also sort of wind down with a little talk about what my most recent project is for National Geographic, and it's about whale culture, the very thing that Shane Garrow was talking about in the previous panel. And my work was largely inspired by Shane's work with sperm whales, and my project will be looking at multiple species of whales in locations around the world. But this is an image that I made last year while working with Shane and Dominica, and it shows what he was talking about. This is culture, this is babysitting. This is an adult female sperm whale in one of these family units babysitting a calf whose mom is 600 meters below feeding on squid. So these are the things that I want to bring people into. I think it's going to be a perfect trifecta of fascinating science that reveals human cultures, really, but in the ocean with charismatic animals, animals that we should know more about. And I wanted to close today with something a little different. I recently wrote a poem. People are running for the doors now. But I've never written a poem before, and I probably never will again. But this actually came to me in a dream. I was falling asleep one night, and I think I was inspired by the spirit of Dr. Seuss, particularly the Lorax. Are you familiar with the story about the Lorax, the little creature that speaks for the trees? And I wrote about his cousin, an ocean creature, so if you'll bear with me, here goes. I am Isorax, I speak for the seas. My cousin the Lorax, he speaks for the trees. My friends are the starfish, the whale, and the seal. I came here for them and to make an appeal. I rose up from the deep as I had little choice. I needed to speak for these friends with no voice. I came here right now to get your attention, for your attention, it seems, is in love with invention. The invention of gadgets that have buttons and screens, in love with self-portraits and talking machines. These things are all nice and bring smiles to your faces, but there's something much bigger in the biggest of places. I speak of a world that I'd like you to know, a world that's nearby, where there's ebb and there's flow, where a palette of colors, some pink and some green, fuel an engine that drives a most special machine, a realm teeming with life in perpetual motion. Perhaps you have heard it's a place called your ocean. For way, way too long now, you've filled her with toxins, obnoxious, disgusting, foul-smelling concoctions. You've taken the redfish, the bluefish, and more. You've netted and trawled them from the precious sea floor. You might think, go away now, it's not my concern, but there is no one other, nowhere else I can turn. You believe that she's vast on a grand ocean scale, but I warn you, my friend, she's not too big to fail. The time has long passed for more ifs, ands, or buts, for she's dying a death from over 1,000 cuts. Healthy oceans are not just important for fishes. Healthy oceans provide the most precious of riches. The sea gives you weather and most oxygen too. Yes, the air in your lungs indeed comes from the blue. So be good to the mangroves, the reefs and ice shelves. For the good that you do, you will do for yourself. I came here today not just with forewarning. I came here right now at the dawn of new mornings. It isn't too late, for the corals still live. The dolphins, the urchins, the sharks will forgive. Like my cousin the Lorax, who pleads for the trees, I ask for your help. Please, please help the seas. For everything matters, birds, bugs, and fish too. And if you're not the one, please tell me then, who? Thank you.